Hi, my name is Kinesh Doshi. I'm the CEO of Accionlabs. I had a great session with Richard Citrin and Michael Couch. In this session, I talk about my own journey of building Accionlabs and all the leadership skills I developed, including my big belief on multiplicity of viewpoints and how that helps a leader find the best out of his employees, his ecosystem.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us for another edition of the Leadership Café, where we talk to extraordinary people leading remarkable businesses. We're your hosts. I'm Richard Citrin.
And I'm Michael Couch. Today, we're very excited to have as our guest Kinesh Doshi, who is the CEO of Accionlabs. Did I pronounce that correctly?
That is right.
Cool. Good. Well, thank you for joining us. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we're sitting here after having a freezing night in Pittsburgh, and you're sitting in sunny Orlando. We understand, huh? So we're a little jealous.
I spent 15 years in Pittsburgh, so I had two of my children there, and I'm excited about Pittsburgh. Absolutely.
Marvelous. Well, Kinesh, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your business? Anything you'd like to share with our listeners to get us started?
Absolutely. So I'm a software programmer by training, and I'm a native of India. I grew up in Delhi, did my undergrad in electrical, grad school in electronics engineering, and then ended up of course, doing a lot of software work since then. I've lived in, all over the globe. I've lived in Singapore. I've spent a lot of time in Asia Pacific, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, traveling all over. Worked in with a company in Germany, and then in 98, I moved to the U.S. and spent a few years in Midwest. So my introduction into U.S. happened in the beautiful small city of Moline, Illinois, and I moved from Singapore to Moline, and almost from 4.5 million to 4,500 people with one McDonald's, one Walmart, and so on. So it was great, very welcoming place. And
nice.
And then I moved to Pittsburgh, spent 15 years there, and last 6-7 years I've been here in Orlando.
Yeah, and tell us about the Accionlabs. So what do you focus on there?
Absolutely. So my background as a software programmer, and I became an architect and so on. So I've kind of risen through the ranks. One of the things I did is I worked with a lot of high-tech companies, which they're known as tech companies in the industry today. So I worked a lot of software and tech companies, and I realized that the needs of a tech company are a lot different from a lot of other organizations. And that was sort of a space that I spent almost 15 years before starting Accion. And one of my ex-CEOs had become a venture capitalist when he sold his business. He actually took the company public, and he became a VC, and he constantly reached out to me saying, why don't you start your own company? And it was funny. I was very nervous. I didn't want to start a company. So eventually he said, give me your bank account number. And he wired me $1 million. And I was, instead of excited, I was nervous next morning. So I went to Pennsylvania Department of Commerce website next morning and set up a company. So I call myself an accidental entrepreneur and not really and so we do a lot of M&A, and when I acquire businesses, I tell them that, look, you are the real entrepreneur, I'm the accidental one. And so what Accion does is we saw, so in 2011, when I got the funding, I started Accion, and the big gap we saw in the industry was around what we call as emerging technologies. So you probably know a little bit about innovation, and some of the newest software innovations have happened using new and emerging technologies like cloud and mobility and machine learning and so on. And what we found is that the industry has a huge demand for that skill set, but there's not many companies that offer that capability. So we started the business with that thesis, and it has worked out very well. Year one, we had 40 employees. Year two, we had probably 200 employees. Then grew to 500 and 1,000 and so on. Today, we have over pretty close to about 5,000 employees globally. And what we do is we specialize in, we call as innovation engineering. That means building new and emerging software. So I'm happy to share more information about the service offerings, but basically we help our customers build new software or rewrite existing software. And we have customers in healthcare, we have customers in banking and financial services, we have customers in legal space, we have clients in supply chain, retail. So it's a pretty cross-industry experience that company has gained so far.
I'm fascinated by the transition that you must have made from being, a software engineer, architect, being a technology expert to becoming a leader. Was that a scary transition? Obviously, waking up with $1 billion in a bank account can be a little overwhelming, as it sounds like it might have been. What about that transition to being a leader? It's not all sitting up there in the ivory tower building out the strategy. Sometimes it's being in the mud and figuring out about this person or that person. Certainly 5,000 employees, you've got a big team of people that I'm sure you're overseeing as well. What was that journey like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing is, since I have been an employee and I've been a technologist myself, I think for me, I had to go sort of to the other side when I became the leader. And I carried a lot of that experience with myself, because all my employees, and I tell them, you are the future entrepreneurs. So you are the ones. So I see myself in you. And I think being able to see that. So, growing up back in India, and I talked about this in many of my my town hall meetings and so on. I tell our employees my own journey, that I lived in a very, I grew up in a middle class family. I lived a very simple life. We realized that mindset you have to carry all the through in your life, where you're looking at everything, the most complex things, you just simplify it. What does it mean? What does it mean to others? And putting yourself in someone else's shoes has been the big thing. So I was nervous the day after I received the funding, but I actually, nervousness turned into excitement a few days later, and as business started rolling, I think it became even more exciting. I tell that while the company grows through that journey of 5 million to 50 million to 100 million, I felt like I reinvented and I in some ways evolved myself through that journey, which a lot of people don't necessarily realize that. So I always say that first year or two, you work for yourself. But when you have 100, 200, 300 people, employees working for you, you realize any mistake you make can affect their livelihood. So now you start realizing you are actually working for them and their well-being. And then as you go, you raise investments, you start realizing you're working for your investors, and employees. You don't want to leave that behind, because, we have internally a philosophy called employee is equal to customer. And that's very true. If they are not around, you're not going to make money. But then you start realizing that you're not even working for the investors. You're actually working for the community. And then you start thinking about the innovations you make, the impact it makes. So it's almost a journey of exploring yourself as much as growing the business. So I hope that gives you a little bit of context behind that. So we have this mindset called multiplicity of viewpoints. And I think that really has helped a lot. When you talk to employees, you put yourself in their shoes, you understand what they are saying. And I think that has been a great attribute that we've built within the organization, where everyone comes with this viewpoint that let's listen to each other. Everyone could have you could have someone with a better viewpoint than yours.
Right. With your observations about the importance of being empathetic and being humble, and how that creates a learning opportunity. We've heard that throughout the cafe from other leaders too. So it's very, very interesting and exciting to see. That's a key part of your journey. But multiplicity of viewpoints. I would expect that that's a key driver of innovation. Is that how you view it?
It's such a great connection you made between the multiplicity of viewpoint and innovation. I haven't seen many people do that. But so we believe in innovation, and I always say innovation is not that amazing machine learning algorithm you wrote or this great cloud technology that you tested. Yes, that's innovation. But innovation is also to welcome change. And opportunity of innovation lies in everything. There is a better way to do this podcast. There is a better way to hire employee. There's a better way to retain an employee. There's a better way to communicate with your customer. And when you start thinking about opportunity of innovation lies in not just this exotic, sexy things like machine learning, but it lies in everything. And that's when your organization becomes innovative. And the foundation of innovation is being able to listen, being able to welcoming to new ideas and new thoughts. And I have this philosophy. A lot of people think listening is a acoustic process. The listening is not a hearing process, right? Listening is also not an empathy process. It's not like you listen to someone with love and affection if you don't act upon what you learned from that discussion. You didn't listen. So we always say that listening doesn't end when the meeting ends. Listening actually only begins when the meeting ends, because now you took some action items, you took some learnings, and you now circled back with an employee or a customer or a partner with an action. Listening ends when action is done, not just because of a compassionate process of keep listening and letting someone talk. So it's just a multiplicity of viewpoint transcends into your ability to listen, transcends into your ability to innovate, and so on. So thank you for making that connection, Michael.
When we do our work around leadership development, Kinesh, one of the things that we say is critical for leaders to manifest and own is the ability to reflect on what they're learning. It's not, as you said, it's not just about hearing, it's about learning, and then what do you do with that information? And so many leaders rarely take the time to reflect because there's so, and it's the same thing for employees these days. There's so much right in front of us. How can we support them in stepping back and asking the question, what have I learned today? How am I applying this? What kind of boss am I? What kind of employee am I? It sounds like that's something that you emphasize in your team meetings and your work with your leadership groups.
And I always tell, absolutely, Richard, I always tell that the biggest change you will see at Axion is everyone is equal and everyone has a voice, and everyone must be listened to. And really, I think the philosophy comes from very early on. If I may share that little bit of context behind this thinking, when I was probably 18, 19 years old, I actually read a book written by Gandhi called My Experiments with Truth. This is a book available, of course, everywhere. And you learn about Gandhi's journey. Most people understand the journey of Gandhi as a lawyer to a political leader, and this history around non-violence and all that. But what many people don't realize is that in his book, Gandhi talks about, and he says that he makes this phrase, and it's pretty deep. He says, "Don't expect me to be consistent with the past.
Uh-huh.
Expect me to be consistent with the truth and data." So what he means by that is, don't expect me to really go back and say, yeah. And how many times as leaders we try to be consistent with the past? So I'll give an example to you. We do an M&A, we acquire a company, we create a big business case, we create big pro forma synergy and all that, and then we realize, oh, that was a wrong acquisition. And what happens is leaders continue to justify that past decision, saying, well, that went wrong, this went wrong, instead of saying, the new data reveals that was a bad decision. And I'm sorry, we made a bad decision, we'll correct it. So to give you a sense, I took this thought process and wrote a white paper in my MBA school. And it was very well received because the paper talks about how you can take the learning from This idea of not being consistent with past, but consistent with truth, and take it to your corporate world. So I'll give, if I may give another example, this story of this not being consistent, but consistent with the truth. I walk into a meeting to fire a very senior leader, sales leader. We all as business leaders are in a tough situation where someone is not working out for 3-4 years. So I had my HR leader had the termination letter in her hand. We both walk into this meeting and say, hey, sorry, you worked really hard. It's been 2-3 years. We haven't seen any really outcome out of all the efforts you put in, and we would like to let you go. And even before I say that, he says, Kinesh, I think this is why you called me into the meeting, and I totally appreciate the decision you are taking, and I support that. But I have one point I want to make. And I'm like, okay, all ears, what's your new point? So we have the check ready, we have the termination letter ready, his final salary. And this person says, look, you've used me as a salesperson, but I could be a great recruiter. Would you consider me in a different role? Now, anyone else would have walked away because we just want to get done with things. And I'm like, okay, that's an interesting new fact, new data. Let me try that. And so I walked away saying, okay, we'll give you 6 months and see what you do. That person turned out to be one of the best recruiter I ever hired in my life.
That's great.
Right.
So being open to new data, new ideas, I think helps a lot.
Yeah. So I say a constant theme that we're dealing with organizations right now is how to cultivate innovation. And you've made several points here. First of all, multiplicity of viewpoints. Listening involves learning and taking action, and then being consistent with truth and data. And that's where we see the disruption coming from, particularly being consistent with the truth and data. You're stuck in the past. Well, guess what? Somebody's going to listen to truth and data. I find that to be phenomenal. How do you maintain that kind of culture when people are working virtual? When we have the pandemic challenges, the world of work has changed. How do you maintain those key culture points in this kind of environment?
A few things. So first of all, I'm a very high touch leader. So I spend a lot of time with teams and employees. In fact, just this morning, I had 2 different sessions with 2 different teams before I jumped on to this session. So one is a very high touch engagement, and even more so during the COVID time, because people are working remotely. So I have lots of town hall meetings, lots of quarterly updates, and that's one. The second thing is I believe that the culture is promoted when you have culture ambassadors in the company. So what that means is I spend a lot of time with top tier of the leadership, particularly what I call as tier 1 and tier 2. Our tier 2 leaders we call MVPs, most valuable players. So I have a 2-tiered leadership structure, and I believe that the only way the culture will be promulgated and it will go out there is I have these people promoting that. So I do a bi-weekly with our top leaders and at least a quarterly with all our MVPs. And I think that's just a huge, and we do an annual leadership summit and innovation summit each year. Of course, we couldn't do it over the COVID time, but we do that where we get all our about 250 to 300 top leaders together in a common place, and we do a lot of physical interactions with them. So these are some of the more touch-related approaches that we do. We recently hired a chief people officer, so she has been putting a lot of some of these cultures in a framework. So we have our own internal leadership video. We have our values and goals and mission statement, very well documented. And then an interesting thing we do is we don't talk about a value. So one of our value is innovation. So to give you an example, but we don't really talk about just as a value. And we have an acronym called THRIVE, which, a total ownership and so on. So we have like a full structure there. But for each of that point, we tell a story. Because employees don't connect with a banner. A lot of companies print all these banners and they go out there, Thrive means this. But what we do is we actually tell a story. Here in 2018, we had a customer and this happened. And this is an example of total ownership. And then we give an example of innovation everywhere. So, when you talk about a story, I think it connects with people. So those are some of the ways we kind of
Excellent.
create the culture.
Well, we've worked with a research colleague that we've tracked culture through the pandemic. And we're finding that culture does suffer eventually. And it's because organizations are not doing the things that you've talking about, being very intentional about culture, and don't just make it a poster on the wall, but accelerate the opportunities. We call them culture carriers. But I like your idea of the MVPs, the culture ambassadors. You can't do it by yourself, and it's got to be done and exhibited in behavior. And that's the other cool thing about your stories. That's behavior that we did as an organization, and it reinforces and sustains culture at a time when it's very difficult to do. Very impressive. Great. Thank you.
One other thing, if I may quickly add to that, is that, a lot of people think culture in East is different from West. And they try to have this mindset that, okay, this works in East and this was, and we stereotype ourselves and, our organization. But I'm a big believer in universal culture, because we are all Facebook citizens today. We're connected. I mean, there are as many people watching Steelers game back in, let's say, Malaysia or Indonesia, as I know we're all excited about the football. But see, the point is that the culture transcends the geographical boundaries.
You're right.
And so, when we think about work-life harmony, and I don't use the word work-life balance. And so when we think about work-life harmony, that doesn't mean that, people from, let's say, India will work harder and more hours than people in the US. So we try to create a very unified culture across the organization.
Yeah. And that's what our research is finding too, is organization culture is organization culture. And there's things that might look a little bit different, but the drivers of performance out of culture are very much the same.
People are people, and they have the same drives and desires and feelings and needs. Kinesh, one of the questions as we begin to wrap up here that we've been asking people is that, the last couple of years have been pretty tough for people, and most folks within organizations and personally have thought about what the pandemic and the post-pandemic life has done to them. We like to turn that around a little bit and ask about what the pandemic and this post-pandemic life has done for you and for your organization. What do you see as kind of the gifts of the pandemic?
No, that's great. That's a great question, actually, because every time when we go into a conversation, we talk about challenges caused by pandemic, and a lot of personal loss has occurred and so on. I think from our organization's perspective, a lot of things have happened. We have been able to, first of all, there is a lot of recognition in the industry about digital transformation. So from a business perspective, it has been a huge boon for us, because companies, there has been some research that says the pandemic accelerated the demand for transformation by 5 years. So whatever was going to happen in 2027 is happening right now. So that is a great benefit to us, companies like ours, where we are doing innovation, we are doing emerging tech, and companies want to invest in that. So that's from a business perspective that has occurred. If you really look at from talent perspective, it also has enabled global acquisition of talent. Because people are remote, companies have started welcoming the idea of talent that doesn't necessarily have to be like, our Pittsburgh talent is working for our customers in California, which 2 years back, they were not that open to distributed talent and so on. So I think we are able to tap talent in other geos. We ourselves are hiring people in Latin America, in Argentina, Colombia, and Mexico, Romania. So we're able to actually tap into a global pool of resources. So that has really helped also in terms of really easing out the supply chain issue in our business. The third thing that we are able to do is we're able to actually create teams that are a little bit more self-functioning. When you walk into an office and you see a boss every day, you become a little bit dependent on that boss. But when employees are working, largely from home, they have to create an initiative. They have to be self-driven. So it's amazing. You are seeing a lot of employees who are quiet, a bit passive, in their pre-pandemic days. They are active, they're able to communicate, and so on. So I think that's the third benefit I see. Of course, there is a work-life harmony aspect, which runs both ways. We have seen employees not quite happy working from home. There are employees who desperately want to come back to office, and we've opened up our offices and so on. But I do believe that there's an element of that. People have found spiritual peace over the last 2 years. People have realized the value of personal life and family and so on. We've been doing motivational sessions every Friday. In fact, we did a session today where we talk about so one of the spiritual topic, or again, really helps our employees kind of find that balance and so on. So I think people have made the best of it. I've spent more time with my son teaching him calculus, and employees have found ways to learn new skills and all that. So there are other benefits I'm sure you've heard.
Yes, wonderful. That's great. Well, Kinesh Doshi, CEO of Accionlabs, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a wonderful conversation. What would be the best place for people to find out more about Accionlabs and, if possible, reach out to you for follow-ups?
Absolutely. So our website is www.accionlabs.com. So you can get more information on the website. There's a lot of content there. It's all searchable. So find good info. My contact info is also, every leader's contact info is on our website. I'm available on LinkedIn. I check my messages every day. So anyone can reach out to me directly on my LinkedIn as well.
Great. Thank you. Well, I'm going to make sure I connect with you on LinkedIn for sure. As a thank you, Kinesh, we want to send you a copy of our book, The Strategy-Driven Leadership, that Mike and I co-authored last year. We're proud of it. And I think a lot of the things that you talked about, you'll see in the book as well. So that'll be great. We want to remind people that we release these podcasts every 2 weeks on Thursdays. You can find it at your favorite podcast location, whether that's Spotify or Apple Podcasts. So it'll also be posted on our social media and websites as well. We want to also thank our producer, director, and technology guru, Chad Barr of the Chad Barr Digital Empire Group. Chad does a great job for us in our podcast management. So we are so grateful to have you, Kinesh, to join us. And I'm Richard Citron.
I'm Michael Couch, and we look forward to connecting with everybody on the next episode of Leadership Café.